I am sorry you missed it. This is the Free Jerry's Brain Call for Monday, October 19th, 2020. Onward.
So,
please.
Mark, you weren't there last time, and last time the web API was giving bad signs, but I progressed a bit on the meme brain. So now the text and images and tags work correctly. I don't know, again, if it adds anything or if how up to date the API is with what you're doing. But if you want a quick checking of how these things work.
Yeah, no, I saw the video from last week, but that would be great.
Yeah, now that the API actually does work, let me share screen. Oh, which Jerry has to enable. God, Zoom is being annoying with that. And we want this one. And I'm sharing this. So this is the climate home. The links, the internal links work first from the text. So you can speak about things. This is with Jason, so we know what's going on. Now, I don't know if there's one. Oh, no, that's an actual link to. And one thing I'd like to show also, I think there's an example here. Just in dashboards. No. Topical entry. I'm looking for something that has a tag. Here. This has tags. So visualizing future impacts has tags.
Oh, this is showing you all the tags, right? Okay.
Okay, and the tag has children, but this is something we've already visited, which has this tag. So there's a backlink on the tag, but only on visited things because I don't have an API point to ask what has this tag. But at least it does find things going forward that have this. So now there's a tag, the children, the jumps.
And the Marc-Antoine, the with tags is when it's a cache, a hit in the cache, right?
Exactly. Yeah, with tags depends on the cache. But still, it's
very cool.
We now have a notion of who has these. See, this has tags also. So we get the. Now here we probably won't get any with tag because we've never seen anything that has that tag. If you knew we could visit it, it would be part of the cache, and that's how we would get it. But still, I think it's progress over what it was. Now the attachments don't work, and which is a problem. I need to find a way to get the attachments. But images work, and internal links work. So that's the progress. That
so
in
terms of the attachments, is it the URLs that don't work, or is it physical attachments that don't show up?
If it's a URL, it's fine. It's the physical attachments.
Okay.
Because basically it's an internal link, and probably I could.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is though, because we use very few physical attachments in the climate web. There are some.
I think maybe the content is even given as an attachment.
I think that's the back end.
Yeah.
Like the Notes MD is the back end code that sits behind.
I think that's right.
The thought.
Yeah, I think that is right. And if we look at the goal of climate web, so the root is this. Let me just check this. So this is the first thought. Here's the notes markdown, and here's the audience entry points. Yeah, here's the notes HTML. So I'm going from I'm not using the markdown much here, but yeah, I think these are the notes content. And these are there because they're in the content.
And so, Marc-Antoine, if I understand, this seems like a huge step forward in terms of being eventually able to transport this to something else. Is that a safe statement?
It is.
Okay.
It is. I mean, we'd have to write a crawler, I guess, as the next step to get everything progressively, which should not be a monster of a job. I just haven't tackled it yet, but
Cool.
it's doable. I would like, if there's attachments which are not the nodes, I think we need an API point for that. There was something else we needed an API point for, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Yeah, the types. We do have we needed an API point to get the type info, because we know something is of a type, but we know nothing about the type. And that's still a blind spot, but I mean, worth looking at eventually.
Okay.
That's it. And
Cool.
the state of the meme brain, I haven't touched it since last week. It's just last week I couldn't give the demo because the server was down.
Yeah, that looks really good. Lots of good progress.
That's super interesting.
Other than that, I think, I get the impression there's much more action in the Thursday call these days than in the Monday call.
Well, they're different calls entirely. Yeah.
I know.
And the Thursday call is going to get, I was just thinking about this in the shower this morning. The Thursday call is going to get eaten by this workshop. So it's not going to feel like the normal sort of more social Thursday check-in for at least 2 weeks, maybe a little longer. Which worries me a little bit, but I think it'll be all right. And I'm happy for the workshop because I think we need some more refinement on why the hell are we here.
Yeah, I'll be there Thursday. I have a slight schedule conflict on the last hour, but I'll try to.
Thank you.
Well,
So this Thursday is a normal length Thursday call. It's the 29th. That's the long one.
Oh.
The 29th is the 5-hour workshop, not the 22nd.
Okay, I got it wrong. Good.
Not the 22nd. Sorry. Yeah. We're going to start doing things on this Thursday. We're going to start sort of showing each other what we've done. But the 29th is the long one.
Okay, good.
Oh, sorry, Mark, you were jumping in, I think?
Well, just to come back to a very FJB question, to the extent that it now looks very feasible to export Jerry's brain or to export the climate web for that matter, has there been much discussion of what it would be exported to?
The first thing is it's exported to the cache.
Right.
So then once it's in the cache, you can do other stuff with it, either kind of manually or we had talked about writing an API to the cache, our own internal, I don't know if that's the right word, but our own, an API we own into the data.
So yeah, maybe in answering your question would be that we could then, multiple people could write different places that data could appear. So it's not really exporting it to a new system, but just freeing it up so that we could create front ends on it. And then, I don't know, in theory, it'd be nice to be able to throw it into Notion or into Miro or whatever.
Or a wiki.
Yeah, a wiki.
Something I failed to say is there are, if you hit brain/Jerry or brain/climate with accept JSON get, you will get the cache content. So there's already this. And if you get a thought accept JSON, you'll get the cache content. So it's possible already to read everything from the cache.
But Mark, a thing you could think about if you want is what kind of front end your business would be interested in sponsoring some work on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I've been, I decided to give a help on the back end because that's my core competency and I'm efficient. But yeah.
Yeah, if I can find some time, I'd love to play around with graph visualization. But it's I've been busy, so
it's not something you do at a corner of a table. Let's put it this way. I'd also like to, but right now I'm still busy designing them. Hello.
A GPT-3 connection would be, and it'd be fun and terrifying, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Does anybody want to summarize our plot for Max? Like where we are?
I think you should.
We had a good short walkthrough from Mark of the upcoming the beta dbrain 12 and some of the new features, including backlinks. And then Marc Antoine just demoed the current state of MemeBrain, which is looking very good.
Cool. And you're talking about GPT-3, huh?
What we were doing was talking about the next step in MemeBrain is a possible next step is implementing the spidering function. So we can, we're getting to the point where MemeBrain understands the brain data pretty well. So it's maybe a time we could start to think about spidering.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing we might think about with MemeBrain is when we might want to show it to more OGM folks, or maybe all the OGM folks. Personally, I'm a little bit split between, I think all the folks here don't mind the 1995, no CSS look. But I think that's probably going to be distracting for at least a good chunk of the OGM folks.
What would it take to get a version up where anybody crawling either brain would collect up a persistent trail of nodes that they had traversed as the beginnings of their own OGM-y sort of brainy thing?
I think that the technology for that is not too hard. I think presenting it in a way that makes sense is not non-trivial.
Mm-hmm.
It's like somebody would have to kind of conceptualize, what it means to have a window into Jerry's, my personal window into Jerry's brain. This is my copy of it. What does that mean? How is it presented? What's the mental model for it?
Partly I'm kind of thinking about this as just something to play with so that people could start experimenting and writing other kinds of code that plugs in with GPT-3, with whatever, so that we get the other edges of this kind of playing before we actually even really have a back end. And Marc Antoine, are you saying that the back end is kind of like verbose, like that the files will turn out to be really too big?
No, I'm saying
that seems not that big.
It's not that big because the cache doesn't have that much of the content.
Okay.
Yet. I mean, people have to use the system for the cache to be fuller, but I wanted to give an idea of where the cache is at. No, the cache is verbose, but it's as much as the API. No, what I wanted to say about this is the main, it's not difficult. It's very much known technology, but it will take time because it means having a user model, login, blah, blah, blah. Those always take time, right? It's CRUD, but it needs to be done. I
think a more useful practical first step is just letting people browse the brain through MemeBrain. I don't think we need to add, a concept of personalized journey through it.
Persistent store?
Well, we have the persistent, it's already caching in the background.
Yeah.
So what I heard you to say, Jerry, was it would be nice if I had an idea of, here's Pete's tour through Jerry's brain, but and that's what I was talking about. That needs more kind of thought about what does Pete's view of it mean,
Yeah.
But I think just being able to, so another thing that I think would be nice is search and actually doing a search into the.
There is a search.
The main one. Yeah, not local search, search into their API. And I think maybe another thing is just a control where you can if we had something where you could paste in a link, the kind that Jerry posts in a chat. Wow, it's gorgeous.
That is nice.
Do you want this to be? Do you have access to the repo?
Yeah.
So do you want to just add it, or should I do it, or?
Either way. But those two things, I think if I can take a chat link from Jerry and paste it into MemeBrain and I get to the right page instead of going through WebBrain, I think that's something that would enable accessibility for people. And then another thing is search. I want to search for, I want to do kind of the thing that Jerry does, except he just knows the topology. But if I can search for LiDAR in Jerry's brain through MemeBrain, then that's another accessibility feature.
Can I ask a very naive question? And I asked Pete this question a couple weeks ago in a call. Is there any issue here with damaging brains? Are you guys doing brain surgery of any kind? Or is there any conceivable way that we're screwing with something? No?
It's read only. They would have to be like really terrible programmers to have left it in a state where our read operations do anything that affects the data.
And are we confident or not?
I mean, if we created it, no, I mean, they'd have to try hard to make it to where what we're doing right now would hurt them. I mean, if we did the spider and we let it go at top speed, maybe, but we're not going to do that.
Okay.
And that's only if, so for that to happen, we'd have to run our, like, multi-thread our app and try and thrash it, and they would have to be bad programmers. So both of those happening at the same time.
At what point are they going to notice that you guys are poking around inside the brain?
That'd probably be if we spidered it, maybe. If we went and grabbed all the data.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about throttling the spider, so it's not really impacting their system very much. I think another time when they'll notice is when we start talking about it. So if we say, hey, look, you can look at Jerry's brain through, this magic interface that's not the brain, that's gonna get their notice.
We'll tip them off, yeah.
Get their attention.
And is there something they could do to shut all of this down with one keystroke?
Easily, yeah. It wouldn't be, it'd be, 10,000 keystrokes, but in a day or two, they could easily
just shut off public access too. They could just turn off the web brain.
To do that, they'd have to write some code that fixes it so their version of the web brain works with their secret. They'd have to put a little bit of encryption or access control.
A tiny thought on the side, and Mark probably knows more about this than I do, but Harlan has never considered an open source strategy because he could never figure out a business model that would support his little business doing that. He's never seen a way across that river. If we or anyone could propose a viable model for him that shows him thriving in an OGM world, then I have not invited him or anyone, or him or Shelley or anybody, into OGM conversations, because this is like the insurrection, sort of. But if he saw a viable way for the brain to thrive in an OGM world, he might, and I say this with full knowledge that he has never followed any of our advice, but he might actually sort of cross the river and cooperate and create a foundational piece of what OGM could be, which if more open and so forth, would be super interesting as a place to link to all the other tools we're talking about.
You do know that he's been busy suing people who copy anything that he does.
Lately, because I know that he did that a bunch long ago.
He did it a bunch long ago, and I don't know if he learned any lessons or not. But
nor do I.
That's a red flag.
Yeah, he was trying to maintain brand whatever, because brain, right? Yeah.
I think it's a good idea, and I think also an open source strategy is going to be pretty speculative.
Is he potentially open to a thorough demonstration / pitch for an API that's quote unquote platform? And is that anything that you'd be interested in?
A, can you say a little more about it? B, given how independent we know Harlan is, he's probably not that open to much of any pitches other than what's in his head. But
Yeah.
maybe there's a way that a bunch of us could sort of frame it. You know, if we're like on board and we see a path, maybe if 6 of us show up, you know, us plus Gene Bellinger plus a couple other, you know, intense brain users who are clearly his lead users, that might actually be swaying.
I think it's a good question, Max, and I think the answer is the bridge he would need is a business bridge, I think, and not a tech bridge.
You mean to fund development of that?
No, here's a business model. So Max's question was, and this works for a lot of people, and you know, a lot of tech people. It's like, dude, we kind of figured out how to make this, you know, work technically. So the problem, Max, is that Harlan is actually a technologist, and he's not so much of a business person.
Uh-huh.
So he totally gets, you know, all the tech stuff, and he's probably thought of it and a lot more.
Yeah.
But he hasn't cracked the nut on, you know, how do I make money? How does my company make money?
Right.
Based on open.
I mean, it's like
use of.
the analog I think of, or comparator, is like OmniGraffle for a decade was just an amazing interface for diagramming, and like maybe a decade too early and kind of focused on the wrong things. But in the last decade, OmniGraffle kind of has plateaued and fizzled and stayed on one platform, whereas Mural and Miro and Lucidchart picked up the ball. And Mural just raised $118 million to, like, you know, do what if you would have assumed OmniGraffle was aspiring and to. And so it's sort of like, yeah, it doesn't sound like. Mm-hmm.
So I think a business pitch saying, here's where this is, you know, here's what you could enable with this. We have kind of figured out how openness and first to market translates into the brain getting into being a bigger company. I think that's one pitch. I think another pitch is, dude, you know, Rome is about to eat your lunch along with a bunch of other people, you know, Notion and Coda and whoever. You just to stay relevant, you have to figure out an open strategy where you can capitalize on Jay's content and Mark's content and make it, you know, big instead of, you know.
Yeah. I mean, isn't one of the clear, obvious steps is to get anybody with content leverage to export all their data at some recent point in time before making any starting to spider or doing anything that creates discoverability, or B, going direct to Harlan with a pitch so that he doesn't have that leverage, because you could walk with that data hypothetically without an interface and go create a new one or import somewhere else. But the like negotiation power is like, we've got our data, we just want your business to evolve.
Yeah. I mean, this is reminding me of my favorite negotiation scene in any movie, which is from The Right Stuff, where the astronauts are all standing in front of the capsule and they're like, where's the joystick? Where's the porthole? You mean we're just going to be like canned monkeys being sent up in a tin? And Von Braun is like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, no, we're not going up. So anyway, this is not quite analogous to our situation, but I like that scene a lot. And I do think that if multiple lead users walked up and said, hey, we've thought through a couple of different aspects, he might experiment. But again, the brain as a company is alive only because he is dogged. Like it should have died long ago. Like it has outlasted all the other little startups like it that I saw 23 years ago, right? That you either became Yahoo or you just died, or you struggled along in some corner, becoming OmniGraffle. And so I'm sorry I introduced this, which is a bit of a tangent from Free Jerry's Brain, but sort of isn't. I'm really interested in presenting him sort of a juicy solution where the company has a better run, where in 5 years the brain exists and has a better run rate than it does today, and that's probably not too hard to figure out, and from a completely different business model.
Yeah.
and then a way to test that, a way to explore that. Like, what does that mean? How does it get there? And then to have Harlan be like, which would be a miracle, I think, but to have him be the test pilot of being an OGM product holder who comes in and says, okay, I want to play. We're going to open this up. We're going to build APIs. We're going to link to linked open data and start sharing, living in the trustworthy data pool, et cetera, et cetera. That would be fantastic. And then if we could find a couple of corporate clients who'd be like, all right, we've been struggling with the brain for a long time because it didn't do any of these things. We'd like to fund some of this development. Then we're kind of rocking and rolling with that. But it does sound like a long shot. Sorry, Marc-Antoine, go ahead.
No. I'm going to harp on my usual stuff, but I do think, and this is not a brain function, and see, I don't see the brain as that original or novel. And hiking onto the brain, yeah, there's reasons to do it, but also I have to see the benefit. And there's some nice visualizations, there's some nice functionality, but otherwise it's yet another graph visualization tool with some nice visuals and some good functionality. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, if you want to persuade him or anyone to go beyond his current market model, I think the proper route is towards data sharing. Like, this is all about you build your brain individually and you publish it. And for me, it's more important and interesting. Of course, that's my hobby horse, to say, how do we compare brains? How do we build brains from different people's brains? How do we combine information and share information? And I would totally go that approach in terms of what's the value of open source? Well, open source means open data, or more important than open source is open data standards. So you can start sharing stuff and building and cross-seeding. And instead of saying Rome is eating your lunch, and of course it is important to say Rome is eating your lunch, but Rome also has severe limitations, which he may feel he has already solved. Brain is a more visual tool than Rome. Rome is working on it, but I don't see Rome as radical either. But saying what will eat everybody's lunch is if you start being able to have real group works around this. And I don't think any of them are on the right path to have a group solution on this. And this is where I see the most value.
So a couple of thoughts just following on that. One, I think Harlan may think he's just built a Rome killer. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he just baked a whole lot of Rome into the notes function of brain, and brain visualization plus Rome capacity might in fact smell like a Rome killer to Harlan. He also mentioned that he's had more uptake on this beta and more interest than he has in the last 10 years of any upgrade they've done to the brain. So that's interesting. Okay. Second thing is that I totally agree with what you said, Marc-Antoine, that there isn't much there in the sense of the data model is really apparently super simple. It's like there's just not much going on there. But on the other hand, there is no other tool I have ever seen that I can do what I do with the brain in. And so another path entirely is to go to somebody like Pinboard and say, hey, and I don't know the founder of Pinboard, but Pinboard is where all the delicious people went, all the refugees went. If you did these three things and did this thing and played with us, you could absorb all the data, and you could take Pinboard in a completely different direction. Does that make sense? And just go to some other player and just absorb our data into some other platform. I don't know, because it feels to me like adding a couple things to a Tumblr or Pinterest or Pinboard-like interface gives you the visualization. Because as you said, it isn't doing that much, but what it's doing is essential to me in particular. But we could easily model in other kinds of environments.
There's no question that okay, I don't know about, again, the value of Pinboard. Again, the value of is the data, right? The Pinboard model is simple. And I don't know about the monetary value of Pinboard. I mean, yeah, delicious refugees came, and I sent some money back way back when, so I'm grandfathered. But how much money did he make out of that? My doubts.
Which is why we need new business models for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why I think the question of business models for sharing data is totally different from the business model of getting a user, selling a product to one user. And we have to think about how to incentivize the network effect, how to make it clear that you have more, you get more value from the product by making your data public and interchangeable with other things. And that's true across user. It's true, in my opinion, about ecosystems, right? There has to be a way, but to do it in a way that doesn't, like people are afraid, and I think rightly so, of totally losing control over their data. And that's why they go to Facebook, for example, where you can decide who sees your data. But I think the real value of Facebook and why people flock to Facebook against the open web, and I think it's a disaster, but if it had been done in an open fashion, it would be interesting. It's precisely this control or appearance of control in the case of Facebook, but nonetheless, appearance of control of the user saying who will see this. You can choose your audience. There's a kind of, no, not sure.
I think they just did a marvelous job of integrating all the tools and making it pretty and making it super simple to link up with humans and making the whole thing entertaining and making it really easy to upload your photos after the party so you can see who puked, in the backyard. And the who gets to see my stuff is in there because it was social circles and all that. But I don't know that it was, to me, it wasn't the dominant victory marching kind of feature. I think it was like ease of use of social interaction. Sorry, Pete.
So for me, it was acquisition of eyeballs, acquisition of participants. So the reason I'm on Facebook and the reason I think people are on Facebook is because everybody else is on Facebook. And the way they did that is incredibly aggressive and probably illegal acquisition of essentially markets. So they had an amazing market acquisition strategy. And then they took that and they built on top of that the dopamine cycle stuff. It's like they continually spammed everybody. I think you want to make friends with this other person, or I have figured out through my network analysis that these other people that you haven't linked up with, and you're going to link up with them, and I'm going to just keep beating you until you do. So it was abuse, user abuse, I think.
Gary just gifted you a cow for your Farmville.
Yep.
Oh,
That's right.
I hated the game stuff.
I attended the session at Stanford that BJ Fogg ran around when Facebook had games to install, and I've forgotten even what it was called. And he had taken his students, and said, okay, you go compete, and whoever gets the most installs wins. And they thought that the winner would get like 10,000 installs. They thought 10,000 would be like hot damn. And the winner got, I think, 4 million installs. And there were a lot of VCs in the audience, and like a lot of things were born in that room.
A lot of millionaires.
It was fascinating to watch. Okay, so we've done a big digression over into the space of including like why Facebook is successful.
But but there was a relevant point there.
Yes.
It's that if we want to make this into an open ecosystem and an open a sharing ecosystem, which I think is capital, we cannot just forget we cannot assume that, I understand your design from trust thing, which is keep everything open, but I do think the translucency is not like choosing audience is not optional anymore.
So just to answer that particular piece of it, my own preference, and I don't think this mirrors Mark or other people, my own preference is to have the data be as open as Wikipedia is, which means that it is completely open, but to have me have control only over what I put in on my view of the data, and to have my data flow beautifully into everybody else's version of what the world looks like from their perspective. But all I care about is being able to protect and say, hey, I put this mesh in, and I can sort of back up to only what I entered. So, and if that part of it is mostly visible, except for a couple small private things, I'm totally happy. But to me, and to me, paywalls totally plunge use.
I don't
Right?
want paywalls.
I know, but a piece of what you're saying is might easily go over to, hey, you can browse my data if only you'll pay $2 a month, which is a model. And I'm completely in favor of a Patreon model where I have built this thing out and other people showed up, and if you like it, leave a tip at the door. The Courtney Love model. I love that. I'm totally in favor of that. But paywalling any of this, I'm not interested in. So
Now,
how does that go ahead?
Is paywalling Mark Trexler's model?
Mark is doing something a little different right now.
Yeah.
What's your model right now?
Well, it's a little different in the sense that what we're doing right now, which is not what we were doing 6 months ago, but what we're doing right now is all of the information is there, open access. What we're saying is if you want to download the brain to your own computer, which makes it much more useful, that you pay for.
So yeah, I mean, if we need a funding model, and if we're trying to convince, I forgot the owner of the brain's name, but if we're trying to convince
Harlan
him,
Hugh.
So the problem is with that is that Arlen's not just looking for funding. I'm sure he's a capitalist, so he's looking for an unlimited potential. So you have to kind of look and see where the money is. So yeah, I mean, so it depends on, like, for Mark, would you like to have a platform to where whenever you sold the data download that you pay, or that they take 10, 20%, whatever the current app, thing is? Is that a model?
Yeah, that could be a model. I mean, the what's in it for them now is that if somebody downloads it and pays us to be able to download it, yeah, they could use it with the free version of the software. But again, it's a lot more powerful if you buy the software, just because there are a lot more things you can do with your downloaded brain and ways you can visualize the information if you have the pro version as opposed to the free version. Interestingly, the brain has never had an affiliate program where if you get people to buy the software, you get a cut. They at least I don't think they've ever had it. They don't have it now.
I guess we need to either show them that we can show an increase in his current model, which is increasing sales, something like that, or a different model. But
a piece of this conversation, if we're going to have this conversation, probably needs to go over into the future and into distributed apps and into what the best of those are doing for new business models, and then just like snuffle over there and go, oh, this looks really good. How do we work what we have over into that? Because I have a feeling that there's plenty of people. There's enough people working on the distributed web and how do we decentralize Facebook and whatever side wins this election cycle, the large sort of internet Goliaths are going to be under attack from the government for a while, like Microsoft was back in the day. That there's going to be a lot of impetus for figuring out new and fruitful business models. And if we absorb that and get some of those humans into this conversation, I think that takes off.
Well, in terms of one of the things that you guys talked about last week in terms of debate graph, is there any vision of this where we import brains into debate graph and then there's a way to link different people's brains via debate graph?
I don't know enough about how debate graph works to figure that out.
Well, I mean, I think in general, a lot of our concepts are around linking brains, different people's brains, and also being able to copy or absorb parts of other people's brains. So that's definitely kind of in our wish list. I think that's kind of unrelated to debate graph itself, but debate graph might be a visualization for it, but they're kind of two separate things.
Debate graph is entirely closed source, but if there is a public version of a graph somewhere, you are free to make a link from your graph to any node in your graph to any node in another graph. And suddenly, if you go to your home graph, you'll find that you're now linked to that entire graph. I've done that, but I accidentally did it to a particular graph that the person who was maintaining the graph wanted it pristine and did not want external links. So she asked David to remove my link. But then he went ahead and put it back in a way that did not show, it shows in my graph, but not in hers. And that satisfied her. So it's, there's all kinds of politics traveling in other people's graphs. But debate graph does in fact allow you to create links among graphs, node to node.
This is equivalent, Mark, to the one-way links you were showing 2 weeks ago, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The links that, it's not that they're one way, but they show one way. I think, you know, sorry, but I'm going to get back to it. When I said you need access control, you jumped on the pay aspect, and I understand your reticence because I share it totally. But on the other hand, I think it's essential, like putting something out in the open and in the public. People are scared of reputation. Reputation is a huge thing in human psyche. And so being able to have a draft, to share a draft with a few friends before it goes public, I think is an absolutely essential function. And this is why I think this whole it's public or nothing is going to fail in adoption. People need private drafts or semi-private drafts. That's one thing. The other thing is in terms of positive economics dynamics. I'm thinking, I don't know what it's, yeah, I think it is Hugo, good find the beat. I'd really like to see a model, and I don't know if that's realistic, where basically if somebody puts in a big piece of thought out, and I decide I want access to it, maybe I do have to pay into it until I start contributing to it. And then maybe the contribution means that I've made it my own and I can get some of the money back. Or even if the person links back to me and uses some of my stuff, we have this, okay, we have a sharing agreement, no money, because we're sharers. but basically pay to take the data, but not pay if you contribute. So kind of really encouraging a contributive dynamics, incentivizing contribution. I don't know how to do it exactly, but it seems to me it should be possible. And it would be a less negative view of what paying means.
I agree. And so I learned the hard way with social text. Actually, people needed a drafts view. I don't mind drafting in public, but there are very few people who deal with that. Mark, I really like your idea of it's almost like you want another Creative Commons thing, like, you know, share alike is like I'll share, or you can either pay or we can share, you know, either way. I think that we win or the world wins. I think the world wins if the system actually allows people to have different, essentially, business models within the information sharing economy. So maybe you give it all away, maybe you ask for tips, maybe it's actually commercial and you pay all for any access, you know. But if we can set up the infrastructure so that it supports anybody inventing a business model on top of that, whether it's a business model we like or don't, I think that's how we win.
Well, that sounds simple enough.
I think of two things. I think of creator tools, monetizing creator tools. But then the other thing I'm thinking about is that conversation we had on email or wherever, maps of content. Like if you think about the collective sense that is made, the value is derived in the sense networks that are either individually created or collectively created. And how do you generate value out of people having demand for that sense? And so I think of like the tools that generate maps of content, and it ends up kind of looking like, yeah, I mean, it ends up sort of looking like a Udemy in a sense, where people have strung together content into sensible nuggets, sensible strings, sensible tracks or networks. So I kind of picture that as a, and then the question is sort of like, well, now they're not gatekeepers of any of the individual nodes. They begin to monetize the maps of like how to gather deeper sense or higher order sense out of the network. And then it's this monetization of like those who are curating those knowledge gardens or something. And it's almost like cookbooks. No one has a monopoly on, well, Monsanto maybe, but no one has a monopoly on food, but cookbooks are valuable for various reasons. Sometimes just the pictures. I don't know. That's something that comes to my mind is once this thing's really cooking.
And I think Mark and I are like in the middle of that. And Mark has been wrestling with those questions more than I have, in a long time, because he's making a living around the brain and the data he's fed to a brain, and I'm not. But we both care lots about like everything that's being said right now, and we'd love to find a way out of this thicket into a place where we have simpler tools that more people can access, that recompenses us for efforts we put into the data, that makes the data as open as humanly possible, that, on down that list. And there was an interesting TEDx talk about intellectual property rights in fashion, and how basically the fashion industry doesn't really have them. They don't really observe them. It's kind of move quickly, get things done, they get knocked off. So, so it goes, but also owning an original is a big deal. So sort of certification back to the big brands is important, but the IP ideas in fashion are very different from the IP ideas in medicine. Right?
Oh yeah.
That's interesting. So how do we pick regimes to model ourselves after here, right? And then same thing goes for when rap music first shows up and everybody's sampling. It drives the record industry absolutely knucking futz. I mean, they're just like crazed because you're suddenly reselling little snippets of everybody else's recordings. And how do you track the IP and who gets rewarded? And it turns out that it becomes a cultural thing that, and I, in reggae, I remember this from long ago, I may be wrong, but in reggae, apparently the B-side of every record back when albums was the same song without lyrics. And so anybody, as an offer to the community to sample your tune and include it in theirs. And it was a cultural thing in the reggae community to do that. And I could be wrong about reggae, could be wrong about whatever, but there's a story there. So part of what we're doing is thinking about establishing cultural norms alongside or on top of a platform that allows for many different business models, and then figuring out how norm plus model equals making a happy living.
And just in terms of where we currently are with the climate web is sort of exactly what Max is describing, in the sense that we've sort of come to the point of saying we're not hiding any information. Yes, we've spent 20,000 hours collecting this information because no one else has done it. But what we're selling, so to speak, is the 1,000 tagged collections where we're creating mini courses and we're creating curated views into that information. And that's what we're saying, hey, buy our ebooks or download to be able to access all of this stuff. All of the information is available online. It's our curation of that information into specific deliverable insight and products that we're asking you to pay for.
Right.
I would love to ask the smartest couple kids in the in the school strikes for climate change movement and the Greta Thunberg movement and so forth, what they would do if they were in your shoes, because that's a group that really needs what you've built. They should be on fire around the base of work you've done. And I don't know if you've built any bridges into them or whatever, but it would be really fun to engineer that conversation to say, hey, here's this, here's that, here's what you're doing, here's what we need to figure out. Like, what would you do if you were in our shoes? That would be super cool.
It would be. Yeah.
Jack, over to you.
So all of this reminded me of the JBoss story. I don't know if how many of you are familiar with JBoss.
Is that like guys and gals?
No, jboss.jboss.org/com. This goes back to the Java Enterprise Java days when Scott McNealy thought that what he was going to do to make money on Java, since everybody was using Java for free, was to come up with this enterprise version, and that would be a for fee kind of a thing. But Sun made the mistake of publishing the J2EE spec on the web, and all of a sudden 4 open source variants of it appeared. And McNealy went around and told all of them to cease and desist or he was going to sue. And the 4 French guys that started JBoss told Scott McNealy very publicly where to shove it and how far. And in the end, JBoss, what they did is they built what became the Cadillac of Java application servers. And it was on SourceForge, and SourceForge was recording more downloads per month on that than there are computers on the planet, for God's sake. But what JBoss did is they put no documentation online. Instead, they wrote a book. And you had to buy the $60 book, okay? But they did something else. They recognized that what they wanted to do was to certify JBoss dealers. So they started conducting this training course, $2,000 a pop, three different courses, and you were now a certified JBoss dealer. And that turned out to be a very successful business model. It became what we now call professional open source. I don't know to what extent that applies to this conversation, but it's worth having it out on the table.
We always thought when I was building Idealoom, Assemble, blah, 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 that certification was a huge deal in terms of, yeah, sure, you can create your own methodology, but here you can use the methodology of, yes, indeed, the people who created the tool in the methodology, but that means you have to be certified to use the official names. The Agile, there's 2 Agile companies, there was a split, but I think they both went to this process of trademarking the vocabulary of the methodology. So you can reproduce it with a different vocabulary and run the cost of having to translate whenever you're speaking to people who are using the official terminology. Or you can use the officious terminology. I think that's a bit aggressive, but I still think that the idea of certification, we've learned with the founders of the methodology, there's definitely something there in terms of business model.
Part of the problem with certification of something that's very distributed is that you're charging a fee to the people who haven't made a living doing the thing you're doing yet. So you wind up sort of in the Udemy space where maybe you charge $30 or something. You can't, and then the other part of certification is the problem with, what's it called? The workout method, boxes. CrossFit. And every CrossFit box has now rejected basically the CrossFit originator because he's an asshole and he was being extortionate. And so CrossFit has sort of broken completely out of its model. But somewhere in the middle here is something super interesting, and in particular, the training of people is something that's valuable, and the qualification of people to do a particular task is really valuable. So how does that get funded properly?
The JBoss strategy was based on the fact that JBoss suddenly was competition for Microsoft SQL Server. And where Microsoft was charging $2,000 a seat and so much per use and blah, 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 JBoss was free. And so the idea is that you now created installers who would go and charge you a one-time fee to install and maintain whatever, but the platform was free, no royalties, no seat cost, nothing. And that really disturbed the server market, so much so that when Hewlett Packard wanted to compete in this space, remember that IBM had already picked up Apache. And so Hewlett Packard went and took over JBoss as its internal platform for serving. So it's a rather complex and high feedback space. Now, can that be applied to free Jerry's brain? I don't know.
So there we are.
Would
I don't
anyone
know-
imagine that this Harlan would be interested in being acquired, or not, you know, to be bought out?
So, small side story to your point, Max. Last year, I met a guy named Joe Polish who runs a mastermind group and was making like lots of money every year, teaching people how to market themselves and how to do their own companies. And it turns out that there's this wide network of mastermind groups, and I think they all belong to each other's mastermind groups, which is part of how they make money. It's very strange. But I met him because I sat down next to him at a conference and I was using my brain to basically annotate what was going on stage. He said, "What is that?" Invited me to a couple of his events. So last year I went to a couple of his, his thingies. And one of the reasons I went was that he understood the possibilities of the brain like instantaneously and deeper than most humans do. He just had this intuitive like, oh, okay. And one of the things he talked about was, oh, I'm forgetting her name now, but there's a researcher in uploading your mind. He was like, she's a friend of mine. Maybe we could bring her in and blah, blah, blah. And then at one point he turns to me and says, would Harlan be interested in just having his company bought? Like how much would it cost to buy the brain?
Right.
And I was like, okay, like he's thinking pretty big about this. Now, I still have a conversation with Joe. I could go back and find out, and we could do other sorts of things, but that might be really interesting. And Harlan probably just wants to be comfortable and probably doesn't see an exit strategy at this point, because the last conversation I had with him was like, the brain is only alive because he's so dogged. And it'd be really, really lucky if anything big and good happens to the brain at this point, like very lucky. It's like, Evernote sort of thing. Evernote missed the march on going public or doing whatever. And now it's like, if Evernote's going to be lucky to survive, the next 5 years. So I think he might, long story short, he might be really interested in an acquisition that meets the sweet spot of what he thinks his future might need to look like.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting equation. It's kind of like a benevolent takeover. If you could come up with the monetization strategy or a value proposition in some future high network effect iteration of this, an investor could be probably more zealous about it than Harlan would be, and if anything, Harlan's going to be the liability, the anchor, incapable of like putting money into Harlan's business plus vision doesn't seem like it's going to like the equation doesn't equal the thing that is being talked about. It seems like the alternative is to take the data from the people who care, take their data and they go somewhere else, and it's either going to be Notion or it's going to be Rome or it's going to be Obsidian, or it's going to be a few other things. And then you're just waiting, you have enough money to clear the lawsuits of Harlan coming after you if you make if you infringe on his design patents, I'm presuming, or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
and he has been litigious. He's never been very open to outside advice on what to do. So the idea that if bought, he would then suddenly be a fully willing partner in an open everything strategy is
right. Or that he's, right. Or they just, I mean, it just seems like a near waste of time to even entertain conversations potentially with him. You're going up against an ego that's been at this thing for 30 years. It's his identity. He's not going to let go of it, and just walk away. He'll put up FU money, dollar amounts, and sit. He'll be so happy to be in the power seat.
Who knows? Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems like either you exit and convince other people with a vision, and you'd need some, power, you'd need power to flex there. And I don't know that what's one of the parts of the equation that's really tricky is there might be 1,000, I don't know what the numbers are for the brain, but there might be 1,000 regular users, 10,000 signups that don't actually use it, or some bullshit numbers out on the long tail. And then there's like Jerry and Mark and probably just a few others, what is my understanding. And they're outrageously outperforming in terms of number of nodes in their data, but so the leverage is not so much the number of people in the network. It's like the sheer content, the quantity of the content, which isn't necessarily the leverage you need in the negotiations with some other platform, which is like, we can bring you 1,000 users. It's like, I can bring you 3 users with millions of nodes, which is sort of like a slightly different.
This is more like the professor and the madman, the origins of the OED. And this is very much a long tail distribution, I think, and the tail isn't that long of users of the brain. There's a few people who are using it very intensively. There's a bunch of other people who love it and use it a lot, and then there's this long tail of people who bought it, installed it, and never used it.
Right. Even the pitch that a Jerry would take to some other platform of like, make the interface resemble the brain, doesn't come with the weight of 10,000 users saying they love it. You're saying it really works for this one person, and they're saying, nah, our little, like Rome, for example, like, come on, that like zigzaggy, crisscrossy network diagram they're doing, like, what is that? That's a data viz joke. Totally agree. But that's their thesis, whatever the fuck that is. Like, you clearly have like put like masterful work on that, and I watch you on the brain, and I watch, I tinker with it myself, and I get it. Like it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons to have the like drop zones, and to, it works spatially. Like, it's actually spatially smarter than a lot of the tools that are prototyping out there. Maybe they're starting at like table stakes and they're going to get there, but like, so I'm like, then part of me is just like, well, if you want to make it like this, just make it like this. But then what's the business model that makes you want to like go to battle against Rome and, take an investor? Like, and is that, or do you want to go like wave the, the Wikipedia flag and get like robustly kind of open source, distributed, created, and like, is there some small granule that people will like begin to spin up around, that's like, what's that minimum viable collaborative energy that people want to invest in?
2 thoughts along your train of thought here. One was, maybe one way to keep Harlan from suing is to perpetually license whatever the feature is that we need to put somewhere else, and that would make him happy because it's a revenue stream of some sort. And how we fund that, I'm not sure. It has to come from somewhere. But also, I think that in the middle of all the things we're talking about is something that has a lot of energy, and we haven't tapped into the central line yet. We haven't like figured out exactly where it is. It's like the old cartoon with the mosquito that hits the central line that's like blowing up, the Gary Larson cartoon. That's what it was. Pull out, you've hit an artery. But somewhere near what our conversation is about is that, and it smells a little bit like Instagram taking off or Snapchat taking off, and it requires us to figure out sort of the mechanics of how these things work, how they snap together, and a lot of those businesses didn't have business models. They basically had viral uptake, and then they got bought by monster companies like Facebook, and that was their business model. It was acquisition, which is not what I think what we're in the room for. I think we're in the room to build out something bigger. And then one other thought that you triggered that I just recovered is, I'm kind of less interested in having Rome or Mural or the Brain or whatever be the hub or the center of some new OGM-like thing. I'm actually really interested in having Beaker or Jupyter Lab or some open framework that's really powerful inside and distributed be the holder, be the container for a series of apps that are cooperating that you can kind of pick and choose and bring in as you need them, that all know how to use this future of distributed, linked, trustworthy data, contextualized, warm data. That is really attractive to me. And so for me, all these tools would need to adapt into that frame or that world, which then makes it a bit more equitable somehow, because now the frame is wildly open. And the tools, it's kind of like, everybody adapted to living inside of web browser windows. It's very similar to that. And this is distributed browser windows as app platforms. That's not a terrible analogy, I think. And so how does that play forward? Bentley, you've got thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking that some of the funding models that I kind of like, that I'm thinking about that aren't really there yet, is like feature funding. So if the community wants something, then you have that. And there is a feature funding website for open source. It's just not very user friendly. There might be more than one. And then, findings, we're building a commons, and trying to fund a commons has been a problem for thousands of years, right? And some communities have solved that because the value is directly coming out of the commons. And to tap into that, you have to do the agreements. But that doesn't seem to work, that same model, in this more complex thing. But that's the nut that I want to crack. So it'd be interesting to brainstorm on that.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, my brain goes to like a cryptocurrency living behind it, or like the DAO kind of thing, and you pay if you consume, and you get paid if you create, and you've got your ledger moving, and you get paid per link, or like all this like collective contribution to it. And I don't know.
One model I've liked a lot is pay for privacy, which is, if you're willing to do this thing you need to do openly, it's free. And if you need privacy, if this data is proprietary to you, then you pay. And
that's
a pretty penny.
Yeah, that's good. It's indirect.
I like where Mark kind of pointed was pay for professional features. Mm-hmm. So you have open access to data, and it's kind of slow and web brainy. And if you want, if you want pro access to it, you pay for that. You pay Harlan, but and you pay Mark. I think all of this stuff is a special case of the tools case of a larger question that's going on in OGM. I think the way, I feel like there's two kinds of commons. There's the commons where sheep are grazing, and then there's another kind of commons, which is the marketplace, or the crossroads. I think all of this stuff, the tools enable better, what I've been calling an OGM, flocking and swarming and things like that. I think we're on the tipping point between COSIS firm and peer production, and now we've got this hyper-networked, scale-free flocking collaboration thing that's going to go on. So I think a lot of that is actually not tools. I think a lot of that is sociology and enabling people to work together better, or returning to the way that people used to work together 1,000 or 10,000 years ago. We've kind of atomized the way that people work together. Everybody thinks that, oh, I'm an island, and I have to like have tiny little connections to other people, or I'm an island in a firm or something like that. All of that stuff is not the way humans have been working for 10,000 years. Humans flock together, they swarm, they talk about stuff. I think to the extent that we help the or OGM and others help the sociology of people working together, that will cause people to be needing tools that swarm and flock and work together well. So Jerry, when you were talking about, I forget now, I'm interested to hear the recording, but tools that the kind of the tools that all work together well, and there's information slooshing around, I think is the right ecosystem to go for. And I think looking for business models on this, the information slooshing around, is kind of the wrong thing to do. It's like, I want to be a developer in that ecosystem of tools, assisting sociology of people swarming and working together better. And in that, that whole ecosystem is going to work because those people doing that are going to be more effective than firms. They're going to be more effective than the old peer production. It's just going to work better. So there's going to be lots of opportunities for value, creation and value enhancement and value capture off of that, larger production model, larger cooperation model.
It's like incentivizing the generation of the higher value the collaboration is taking place on top of a tool.
In a way, I was there when my team built one of the first web browsers ever, commercial web browsers in the world. And, that it's what you wanted to do at that time was not figure out how to make a buck on selling the web browser. What you wanted to do was be in the ecosystem that turned into the web, right? So we're on another cusp of that. It's turning into people though, instead of data, and enhancing that and being part of that ecosystem and being an early mover in that ecosystem is where everything gets better for social justice, and everything gets better for, and everything, and there's plenty of value out of that, right?
I can't help but think that so I started tinkering with some NLP models and doing semantic search stuff and running it across sticky note brainstorms and different notes and things. And it seems to me that the search engine, that there's a moment here for potentially reinventing a search engine more towards a research engine, or a inverse search engine where it's you find what's missing and you invent into it with others, or you find people thinking about similar things.
A sense-making engine.
Mm-hmm. That's way more interesting than interface questions about how to get thought nodes to.
Yeah, I'd noticed several of the things that I'm passionate about are kind of the next gen search engine. Because I'm building thinking of building a community rating system that allows you to, and then you can take those ratings from other people and you can create your own values and then find items, products, politicians, groups that meet your needs. And in the end, that's really kind of a search engine with an advanced search. So, right. And that's just one of them. There's two other ideas that are that. So right. It seems, I guess all of my ideas have to do with information processing. We're in the information age, but we're in the information dark ages, really.
The relationship age. Information is just a byproduct that helps you build relationships.
With people, things.
Everything. Relationships among humans, among stuff, with the planet.
Yeah. I would say that, I would say we haven't got, the information is kind of the base model. And I think that foundation is so shaky right now that the higher stuff is nice, but we can't handle the information we have right now.
One thing I really like the sense-making engine notion. That hadn't occurred to me at all, even though we're sitting here talking about sense-making. And I just want to add, and this is only because of my long-term use of the brain, I'm always adding to a context that makes more and more sense to me over time, and that follows current events, and that unfolds, and that keeps getting richer. And I have to sometimes go in and subdivide and subclass, I have to sometimes go and clear up the mess. But when I tidy things up, when I do some curation, it gets better and it makes more sense to me. I'm crippled in my ability to sense make with other people because it's mostly a single user thing and it's so weird and blah, blah, blah. But I just want to say that a search engine every search is de novo, and you have a nice, in Google, you have an empty page with a search field, and you go search and you get some results, and that's it, and then you start over again. In a sense-making engine, to me, you're adding to the body of work as you see the world. And your history in the sense-making engine isn't just a bunch of links that you went to in your history when you figure out what did I search on Google. It's actually the contextualized reality of your experience of everything and what you think about things and whatnot. And it's selectively shareable, and you can tell stories over it. And when you make decisions, you feed off it, and everything you do kind of makes it better. It's the fungus in the nest of the termite mound. It's a symbiotic thing. And if many of us can behave as polite termites, curating the sense-making tech fabric that we're making, it gets really juicy and powerful. And then we can cut through a lot of stuff very quickly, the way pattern languages help us cut through things. It's like, when you say light from two sides, and people are familiar with that particular pattern for house design, you've cut through a whole bunch of stuff and gotten to sort of something essential about design. And so how do we do that for information, for history, for context, for what we're talking about? So I keep coming back to my weird little experience of curating one map for 23 years, which gave me that big, huge searchlight over my head that says, this really matters, right? And to me, that's a huge difference between a search engine and a sense-making engine. And again, I have only the one person curating version of this for personal experience, but it's so deep and so powerful for me that imagining it together with you all, never mind the larger crowd outside, is super exciting. Like if Pete and I could do like a Vulcan mind meld and manifest it somehow, be like, holy shit, be crazy.
Yeah. I was mentioning this, the visuals that come to my mind is like, just what marketplaces have been built on people sharing graphs? And I was just like, what is going on with Strava? It's people are sharing journeys through nodes and doing it socially. I still don't quite understand the business model. I mean, I kind of understand the notion of connecting socially about the runs that you do and the routes. It doesn't trigger joy for me per se, but it is for a number of people around me. And it's got this combination of social and personal achievement, competition, collaboration. Yeah, so that's one of them that I think about. And then I was like, well, what about Waze? Like Waze is was how did it get this open source collaborative juju flowing that that people, because it was helping people do things faster that a best in class tool by Google wasn't.
What's the math competition website? Math contests? It's there's MATLAB, but there was something else.
It was?
Yeah, there was something else where there's sort of math challenges, math contests. I'm forgetting exactly which one, but sorry, go ahead.
There's an AI one, Kaggle.
Kaggle, I think I'm thinking about Kaggle.
Is that the one?
Kaggle, yeah. Is that the one?
These are all sort of quirky and interesting models, yeah.
Obviously, in the information space, there's lesson sharing, right? There's a lot of linear node package equals thing, but I'm just searching for other ones that are kind of intriguing. And there's
go ahead. There's
a data flow. There's a handful of them coming out. One of them is parabola.io. That are task. They're node graph, flow. I mean, all the stuff with Max MSP, all that stuff back in the day. That was people sharing. I mean, code is people sharing graphs in a certain sense too, right?
Robert, anything you want to throw into the conversation?
I was just inspired by this picture of everyone having their own little tree of knowledge, little comparing to yours. And then going back to a few meetings before, of having the Git-like ability to merge and commit stuff and get into like comparing the trees and then getting I don't know if one big picture is possible, but in some cases when I have like two pieces of information, two pieces of data, and they are linked by a single line, someone else might have this line filled with nodes and more details and more specific information like between my nodes. So there is definitely value in composing the tree of knowledge like together. And about business models, there is a possibility of, if you're talking about knowledge gardens, gardens have corners that have like very specific sorted information or information with like knowledge that is ready to use, to be used. And that could be like generation of income because it's a source of value. So for some people, like going to Udemy is, I do that sometimes when I have a specific subject I want to know more about, and I pay just a few bucks for a course on a specific thing. So this is precisely what could go into like corners of knowledge gardens. The knowledge is like everywhere, but getting to know the knowledge to work for me is a slightly different thing. I mean, I have, by Google, I have everything I want to know, ever wanted to know about everything. But to find my path from my question, which in some cases I don't even know what the question really is, and I discover in the middle of searching for information that, okay, really what I wanted to know is not what I asked for, but something totally different, or maybe not totally, but different enough. And then getting to the end of my search, if it's at all possible, then I have created in my web brain some path and some stream of associations, which can as well be not sometimes necessary if I had this ability to do in software, or if I had someone trusted and certified to do it for me. So that's my...
Love that. And I have to bounce in another minute. But at the beginning of the call, I put up strategylidar.com, which is the new site I just built for me using my brain, kind of in the picture is brain mode, but it's a different framing of it. And everything you were just describing is kind of what I'd like to do. I'd like to apply my own context and perspective to other people's ideas to help them ask the better questions, to help them figure out what their landscape looks like, to make things apparent to them that they didn't see before, all of that stuff. And then lather, rinse, repeat. And I wouldn't mind getting paid well for doing that, because I think that the weight of my history and context and communication capacity is what makes that useful. So how does that work? Anyway, I have to bounce. Shall I just leave this? Shall I pass the call?
I've got to go too.
Or do we all need to go? Okay, let's close the call down. This has been super helpful. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
More soon.